As Phil was talking about earlier, this is a great segue into this because it talks about buildings performing for people and the data. And what really helps my talk is what you said about we have a lot of data, but do we know how to read it, and are we actually using it and putting it forward? So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. I'm the healthcare design director for Payette. We're a highly specialized architectural firm located in Boston. We focus solely on healthcare, science, and research projects, a very narrow focus. Within the healthcare market, our primary focus is multi-specialty ambulatory care centers, high technology installations, and specialized centers of excellence, pediatrics and oncology. One of my key roles as the strategic healthcare design leader is to constantly monitor the marketplace and look for trends that are going to affect the way we design buildings, and then in turn tweak our design process and add tools to our toolbox that will allow us to respond to those trends. Now, given the audience today, I'm going to guess that everybody in here has been through at least one significant design and construction project in your system, more of you, or most of you more than that. But I think one thing that we can all agree on is that any good healthcare project is designed from the inside out. It's a design and a plan wrapped around an operational plan. And while that's true, and it works for, let's say, 99% of the projects, every once in a while, we need to take a building typology within healthcare, and we need to look at it at its base, at its core. What was the basis for design? Because that doesn't change all the time. We just make small changes along the way. If you're going to do that, you actually need to go a little bit deeper. You need to take the right team and the right tools and take that operational plan that's the basis for that design and break it down into a series of components, into its moving parts. If you break it down into those components and then you take each component and you analyze it for whatever the change was that was driving this typology review, and you look at it for what is its value in the stream, how is that change affecting it, and then how can it be modified or customized for this typology, you then take that analysis for all of those components, lay them on top of each other, and analyze the patterns. And the patterns that emerge will start to influence the physical design of maybe a new typology. Now, as we can all understand, the complexities in healthcare and just the number of components that would be in a good operational plan, you can start to see the amount of data that would stack up and the complexity in that analysis. So we can't just analyze that with our gut. We have to have the right people and the right tools, and that's stretching beyond traditional architecture now. Architecture in the future is about bringing in more specialties and more tools to analyze that data. So we need to look at it for what it is. It's numeric, it's big data. And this is how big data is starting to affect physical designs as we move forward. That's the future of healthcare architecture. So if we start to look at it that way, we all go to lectures, we pick up magazines all the time, we read articles, and we're always reading an article or a lecture that starts the changing face of healthcare or the volatile nature of healthcare. From a design perspective, it's absolutely true. Architecturally, we're working in the most volatile market in America because there's constant change. But 99% of the time, those changes are, as Phil said, evolutionary. They're just small ripples against an existing base model for a typology. And there's always small changes that happen year to year, but we can take care of those with minor modifications to the model, slight changes in the design aesthetics, or maybe tweaks in the operational plan. And they're driven by changes in the way we handle information management, practice patterns, maybe advancements in medical technology. But every once in a while, something happens in the market that is so dramatic that it challenges us to actually take that typology and go all the way back down to its base assumptions and reassess that assumption. I believe right now we're on the verge of that type of change for multidisciplinary ambulatory care clinics. Now, a lot of people will say, look, we've been working with ambulatory care since 1995, making major changes, specializing, and doing a lot of changes, Scott. And it's true. If you look at a center built in 1995 versus 2005, they will look dramatically different. But unless you were making core evolutionary changes, most of those changes are actually just ripple changes based on the core base assumptions that were developed in 1995. The model in 1995 was very well researched because it was a new typology or an emerging typology at the time. But remember, all base models have to be based around who's your core user. And back then, the core user were the baby boomers. everything we knew about that base, or everything we set up in that base, was about how the baby boomers would react. Everything from initial siting to facility design, space allocation, to even how the physical model wrapped around the operational plan was based on that user. In 2014, the millennials now outpace the baby boomers. 5 years from now, they'll outpace them by 10 to 12 million, depending on which census you look at. Normally, that wouldn't be that big a deal because we've moved through different generations, X, Y, except that the millennials now are so drastically different than the baby boomers that it challenges us to now take this building typology and relook at it at its core assumptions. Now, first of all, we need to do it to keep the model viable, but it actually presents a really unique opportunity because now, for the first time in history, we have the technology and the information to build a model, a virtual model of your future client, the millennial, and understand that client at a much deeper level than we've ever understood any client before. In fact, if the millennials are really good at one thing, it's leaving digital footprints. These guys drop data, personal data on themselves like cats drop fur. And if you know how to collect it and analyze it, you will understand that client better than they understand themselves, which is really unique. So we have an interesting opportunity. We have a challenge to redefine the model, but we have an opportunity because if you start to look at the data, if you start to understand the millennial, there's an opportunity to create a more efficient and more profitable model for you and actually raise the satisfaction level for them. So we're on the verge of that type of change, and it's all about collecting that data, but then using that data and increasing the tools in your toolbox and developing a design team that actually can look beyond walls and doors. So today, given the time, we don't have time to go through all of the metrics and all the data that we're collecting. Payette, the firm that I manage on the healthcare side, half of our work is actual design, traditional design, but we're a very academic firm. We're a very research-based firm. So we collect and we look at a lot of this data, and this is where some of the trends are coming from. Of course, we look across a wide platform. So what I'll do today in just a little bit is I'll just tweak your interest with a couple of things we're starting to see about the millennials. Who are they? What makes them different? And what are some of the changes to this model that we're starting to conceive? First of all, site selection. The basis for site selection when you were thinking about baby boomers were there were two things you always needed to look for. Was high visibility and access, in and out access, multiple directional access. Because the baby boomers said, can I get in and out of it easy? Do I want to go there? And do I know where that is? Yeah, I know where that is. I've seen it. It's up on Route 1. It's near Best Buy. Visual acuity was very important to them. To the millennials, not at all. Millennials couldn't care less where it is. They're going to research you on the internet. They're going to look at you're going to look at you on the Google map. Then they have navigation in their hand and in their car. They're going to find your site no matter where it is. Okay? So from a good point, we can now stretch out to different sites. We can look at sites that maybe aren't quite as expensive. We don't need the high value, high visibility retail site anymore. But just like millennials are going to research you and look at you on Google Map, what can they also see now? They can see everything around you. And one of the things that defines the millennials is they're much more efficient. They're time efficient. They're all about multitasking and taking care of their time. And you're going to hear that a couple times here in a second. They like to look at what amenities are around you. They're going to try and say, what can I also get done over here or in this visit? So visibility isn't as important anymore, but who your neighbors are is incredibly important. In a survey done 0 to 10 scale, 10 being the highest, millennials were asked, how important is visibility of the site or previous knowledge of where that site is? Have you seen that site? 2. When they were asked about access, ease of access in and out, they either got a 0 or they didn't even answer it. They skipped it. They don't care. So it's important to understand who we're around and why, and if you look at the data, that makes a shift. Weighting concepts. Right now, if you use a typical program model and look at an in-and-out high-volume ambulatory care clinic, about 20% of your square footage is in waiting concepts, waiting areas. The baby boomers saw a waiting area as simply a space to come in, register, check. I want it quiet. I want it quick. I want to sit down, read a book, leave me alone. And there is no satisfaction rating whatsoever associated with a waiting area. I don't care how nice it is. The only thing worse than waiting 2 minutes is waiting 3 minutes. So that drove the concept of let's get the baby boomer moving. Let's start the registration process. Let's move them through the system. Even if we get them back in the waiting or the exam area, let's let them wait there for 7, 8, 9 minutes before the doctor comes in because they feel better if they're moving. Millennials, absolutely different. The millennial actually sees the waiting area, if it has the right design and the right amenities, as their time. If you have a place for them to multitask, plug in a laptop, make a phone call, do a little bit of work, get a cup of coffee, they actually didn't even register that as an issue until 15 minutes passed, and they didn't mark it as moderately unsatisfactory until 28 minutes. The millennial actually will wait a half an hour if he can get other things done, and they're satisfied. But as soon as you start putting him through the process, when you start the registration process and move him into the waiting area there, he's now on your time. And they are all about efficiency. So if you stick him in a waiting area, or an exam area to wait, and he waits 10 minutes for a doctor, he's now incredibly unsatisfied. You wasted his time. But if you take that same 10 minutes and transfer it out to the waiting area, now he's happy. Go figure. That's just what the data is telling us. So what does that mean? Take some of the square footage that we were wasting in the clinical block, move it back out to the waiting area, make it an amenity, raise the satisfaction level, and lean out the exam area. They will respond better to it. The third one, and the last one I'll talk about, is the core of the ambulatory care center, and it's the exam pod. This one was really interesting. The original model and even the tweaked model over time, the evolutionary changes, said two things. The baby boomer and the patient was all about value for my dollar. I want to get in. I want it to be about me. I want to see you working. I want to see a lot of people working. I want to know what I'm getting. How are you taking care of me? I want to be touched along the way. I want people to ask me how I'm doing. And when I go back, I don't want to see 50 exam rooms. I want to see 8 exam rooms. That's why we clustered them in groups of 2 or 3, and we turned them and we made wider corridors, because they wanted to make sure that it was about them. That's why you had the large working area in the center. We did adapt to that, and team-based working and nursing care drove a lot of that, and that was okay. But a lot of that was about visibility. The millennials have a whole different model. The millennials, first of all, don't want to be touched. It's that whole ATM checkout, self-checkout at the grocery store model. They don't want to be touched. They don't want 15 people to see them going into an exam room. They don't want to see you working. They don't want to see 15 people walking around. They actually think it's inefficient. If you take that core working area, move it to the back, combine it with 2 others, combine it with storage and support, lean it out, make it more efficient, they're absolutely fine with that. The second thing that's interesting is where the baby boomer didn't want to see a sea of doors into exam rooms, the millennial does. The millennial wants to see 30 exam rooms lined up. The more exam rooms you have, the more efficient your center is, the quicker I can get in and out. If you gave them a choice, do you want to go with a center that has 8 exam rooms or 30 exam rooms? They're going to the 30. They want to walk back and see machine efficiency. So if we take those 2 concepts, we move the work areas out, we make them more efficient, we make the waiting area more of an amenity, we can save 18 to 22% of the square footage allocated in the clinical block. You can either take that out of the center to make it more efficient, make it cheaper to build, or you can turn it back into exam rooms, into revenue-generating space. So if we start to think about the ambulatory care center, literally thinking about the base model and redefining the base model, we can do it, but you're going to do it around data. You need to collect all of that data, and you need to have teams that understand how to look at that data. One of the things we're looking at as we're defining a prototypical model for a client, can't say his name right now, but we're working with a client right now. We went out and got a group from the MIT Media Lab. They spurred off from the Media Lab. They specialize in big data analysis for retail companies. So they help people like the Gap and Apple cite and work on entry perception, curbside view. We had them start looking at data for ambulatory care. How is it perceived? How is it perceived in the urban environment? How is it perceived in a more rural environment? And how do these changes map out across the platform. It's a lot of where some of this is starting to farm out. But the point is, get people on your design team not only to think about walls and doors, think about operational plans, know equipment and information, but also know how to analyze your client through data, because we now have the ability to understand a client at an amazingly deep level. So that's it.